Our second speaker will be Chandler McCoy from the Presidio Trust in San Francisco, who will be giving a paper titled Cultural Landscape Rehabilitation, Lessons Learned from the Presidio. Chandler.
Okay. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking with me to the bitter end, or maybe it won't be a bitter end. Thank you for inviting me to attend this terrific conference. I'm going to be talking about the Presidio of San Francisco today. I have to say, when I left San Francisco on Thursday, I thought the Presidio was a fairly large place. But sitting here over the last 2 days, listening to these talks about vast valleys and sacred mountains and coastal plains in Ghana, I feel like the Presidio is one of the smallest places on the earth. And I'm planning to talk about it in minute detail, so everybody recalibrate your settings. We're getting small now. The Presidio was a former Army base. The Army left in 1994, and it became a national park, but a rather unusual national park, in that it's administered by the Presidio Trust, which is the organization that I work for. The Presidio Trust is a small government agency that was created specifically to manage the Presidio, with the idea that we could keep the money from renting the buildings and put it back into the park. And so I'm sort of here 15 years later to tell you what we've been up to over the last this last period of time. Here's the Presidio. It's on the northern tip of the San Francisco Peninsula. It's very much surrounded by the dense city of San Francisco, although it is a very different type of landscape. It is not a dense landscape at all. Here it is, a view from above. You'll see it's a 1,500-acre site. That's about 600 hectares, and there are 6 million square feet of building space. That's why the idea was concocted that we could actually support the Presidio from the revenue. The Army left in 1994, and they left 860 empty buildings in a very empty landscape. And over the last 15 years, our job has been to refill this with a new community. We have about 3,000 people who live there now, and about 4,000 people who work there now. The treatment strategy that we've adopted for the Presidio is rehabilitation. As Bob Page was talking about yesterday, the Secretary of the Interior Standards lays out a number of different strategies, and rehabilitation is the one you use when you're bringing new uses to a site. As it says here, making possible a compatible use when the property for the property while preserving its features and keeping its historical values intact. Now, rehabilitation offers us a certain amount of flexibility. Rehabilitation allows us to add new features into a landscape, and this is what we've been doing. Rehabilitation allows the landscape to evolve, and it allows us to manage change in a way that protects the historic character. In addition to our goals to rehabilitate the site, which I should have said, the Presidio is a National Historic Landmark, which is the highest level of listing on the National Register. We've also developed, besides this idea that this will be a national park and will have public access and it will have economic sustainability, we've also adopted goals for environmental sustainability. And one of the important things I need to mention in our list of goals here is water conservation. As you know, California has a shortage of water. It doesn't rain in the summer. And this great cultural landscape somewhat depends on irrigation. And this poses a problem on the one hand because so much of the planting and the lawns that the Army planted, which characterize the site, require water usage, and water usage is a problem. We were fortunate in that the Park Service in 1992 hired Robert Melnick and his firm to do a very extensive cultural landscape assessment of the Presidio, and this became our sort of fundamental document in planning. Because rehabilitation allows flexibility and a degree of subjectivity, it's important that you have a fairly extensive knowledge about what you're rehabilitating. You have to understand the site. You have to do planning, research, and careful thinking. Fortunately, this original document was incredibly thorough. It looked at all the layers of history. It looked at the circulation, the topography, the clusters of buildings through the ages, and gave us a very sound understanding from which we could move forward. Another one of the very vital documents in our rehabilitation was this document called the Vegetation Management Plan, which looks at which breaks the entire Presidio down into 3 landscapes. The orange is native plant community. That's the way it was when the Spanish got here in the 18th century. The green is a historic forest, and the gray is considered to be designed landscape. So you can see that almost most of the Presidio is a man-made landscape. Very little is native plant material. We've also have a management plan that looks at the Presidio and breaks it down into 7 districts. Then we've gone in and done cultural landscape plans, such as this one, for the individual districts. These are incredibly important tools for us in order for us to understand the integrity of the site. As I said, the Spanish settled the Presidio in 1776. They built this small adobe fortress on this sort of windswept rolling landscape. And our period of significance at the Presidio is from 1776 to 1945. This is fairly extensive time period, and it's a little bit difficult to contemplate in relationship to the main post. This is the area of the El Presidio that the Spanish founded. This relatively small area spans 200 years of history, and in order to understand it, we had to break it down into these sub-districts, because as a cultural landscape, each of the sub-districts has its own time period, and we couldn't apply a sort of one-size-fits-all approach to the Presidio because each of these areas was built at a different time. On the other hand, we didn't want the landscape to look like a patchwork of wildly different places that are just sewn together, so we had tried to achieve some kind of visual continuity through the selection of our plant palette. This is one of those sub-districts called Funston Avenue. This was the original officers' row. These were little Victorian houses lining a street. And our original concept that we had been talking about for many years was that we would restore the Victorian streetscape. We would put the picket fences back, the gas lights, and these decorative cannonballs, which the Army used quite frequently to create little landscape features with its spare cannonballs, which was, of course, a very notable military characteristic. But we didn't have the cannonballs or the picket fence or the gas lights. This is what we inherited, and it was a fairly dilapidated landscape. The basic pattern was there. We had the panels of lawn and the sidewalks. We had foundation planting and some periodic placement of trees in the lawn. But all of those original features from the Victorian period were gone, and the houses were in fairly dilapidated condition too. What we decided to do was not pick a particular historic period, but draw inspiration from this 1920s era where you see the picket fence is gone and there's a hedge. This is what the landscape looks like today after it was restored rehabilitated about 3 years ago. You see the hedge is starting to grow in. We've left the palm trees that were from a different period, and we haven't tried to create a specific historic period. We've tried to reestablish all of the important features, the foundation planting, the lawn, the sidewalks, and create something that we feel is compatible. This also was our strategy when we rehabilitated the main parade, which was this big drill field at the center of the main post. The drill field was used for marching and parades and all other military practices. This is the main parade. The main parade was very well defined, by the composition of the buildings and by the network of the circulation, which did have a great deal of integrity. But what didn't have any integrity left was the surface of the main parade. The Army had paved it in the 1950s, and we could see that in earlier eras it had been a sort of a grassy field, and then in later times, this is it from an aerial view, it had turned into this hard-packed dirt. And in trying to figure out what surface to put on it, we thought about many different things. Also, I want to point out this edge along the parade ground consisted of these lawn panels with these regular sidewalks and a regular pattern of little trees. Now, this is what we inherited. It was a 700-car parking lot, and you see the trees that the Army had kept so precisely trimmed up until about the 50s had grown extremely large, and many of them had died. And the character of this main parade had been completely changed, and this large parking lot had had an extremely negative effect on the place. So this is what we did. This, as of last April, we removed 7 acres of asphalt, and we returned it to a grassy lawn. And we debated a lot about what surface to use here, given the water shortages that we have. I will say that in the next 6 or 7 years, we plan to create a reclaimed water plant at the Presidio, so we'll be able to use recycled water for irrigation. But frankly, the irrigated lawn provides us with the best surface for the new uses that we expect here. We don't expect soldiers marching anymore. We expect that this will be a public open space that people will play on and picnic on, and will be a welcoming place for the new user group. So we made this decision. And then along the edges, we've made the decision to remove these overgrown trees and replace them with a small species of tree that's similar to the way they looked in the historic period, but we won't have to be trimming them constantly like the Army did. Now my last example is the Public Health Service Hospital, which you can see here. It was built in the 1930s on a remote part of the Presidio, and it was operated by the Public Health Service rather than the Army. This was a compact little hospital campus. It was all built at one time, so the period of significance was 1932 to 1945. And you see some of the features of this, with this sweeping driveway and these broad lawns on either side of this Georgian Revival Hospital. There's a little roundabout and some parking in front. Unfortunately, all of these attractive elements were lost in the 50s when the Public Health Service added these big wings in the front and completely redesigned the hospital and changed the front entrance. They were kind of a dreadful accompaniment to what was a simple and fairly restrained hospital building, and they had a fairly deleterious effect on the landscape as well. This was the condition of the landscape. As a matter of fact, the hospital closed down in 1982, and the landscape had gotten completely decrepit. The houses were abandoned. They'd been boarded up. All of the lawns had died. Most of the foundation planning had died. So we did a cultural landscape report in 2004. We became familiar with the historic features that remained on the site, although a lot of them were lost. And this allowed us to develop our own plan for the site, which wasn't a restoration of any 1932 period, but we were basically taking the historic features that were remaining, and we were changing the use from a hospital to a mixed-use development where the large hospital building would become apartments, and elsewhere on the site there would be offices and a school and other things. But our concept was to retain as much of the landscape elements as we could and create an appropriate and compatible new landscape. This is what the building looks like today. We worked with the developer for this apartment building. The developer agreed to remove the wings and was very happy to restore the original entrance. You see the formality of the palm trees, and a flagpole has been reestablished there. as well as a lawn. This is a row of former surgeons' houses. We've included a fairly residential landscape with simple lawn and foundation planting. Now, one of the opportunities we had to think about, or challenges we had to think about, was we knew even if we do have our recycled water plant in place in 7 years, we won't be able to reach to this zone. So we have a limited amount of water here, and we also, this is one place where the Presidio is discharging its stormwater into the city's system, so we were required to reduce the stormwater. So we felt that lawn was an appropriate response for this historic district, and it provided a setting for these historic buildings. We minimized it and kept it within this ring road. And then all of the planting outside of this became ground covers. We used drought-tolerant ground covers that require much less irrigation. So you see here's a before and after. We've recreated the traditional lawn and pattern around the houses. But as you move away from the buildings, the ground cover becomes drought-tolerant plants, native plants, and so forth. So we're still getting greenery, but without the heavy water usage of a lawn. Elsewhere on the site, we've added bioswales and retention basins in order to help with the stormwater management. And we're actually going to be able to get this site certified as a LEED ND project. That stands for LEED for Neighborhood Design, which is a new LEED category that applies to ensembles of buildings and landscape. So as this is the first time we've been able to get a project certified because of the landscape moves that we made. Anyway, that's the final slide. It's just a little before and after. You see that, in fact, the building and the landscape have both been brought back to an acceptable level. And then this is the Presidio Trust website. If you're interested in looking at more things or looking at the cultural landscape reports, you may find them here. So that's it. Thanks.